There we are. Awesome. All right. Welcome, everyone. So where we're picking up today, we're in the chapter Two Wives, and we're on page 107. Now, before we kind of started this meeting, I was talking about what I spoke about last week. And so for those that missed last week, I did make sure to put the recordings in the chat. But also, I want to do just a little bit a review of what we've spoken about so far. So the chapter that we're in is called Two Wives. And we know, everyone makes the joke, 2 wives, I get 2, ha ha ha. And then I'm always point out, we don't make that joke with 2 employers now, do we? Just going to throw that out there. But what I always suggest that we do is we cross out the word wives. And we talk about what this chapter is really about. So it is not 2 wives, and I actually don't think it's 2 spouses either. But for me, this chapter is to those who are as bound to the alcoholic as the alcoholic is bound to alcohol. That is the title of this chapter. Another way to look at it is to the untreated Al-Anon or the unhealed codependent. And that's what we're talking about. And that recontextualizes everything that we talk about. Because we think that this whole chapter is about just stick with him. Go stick with that drinking drunk. Just put up with his poor behavior. But it's actually a chapter for those who are unable to leave. And last week, as we went through pages 104, 105, 106, and the very top of 107, what we saw was a beautiful parallel to what we looked at on page 31. So for ourselves as alcoholics on page 31, it talks about here are some of the methods we tried. The methods we tried to control our drinking and the methods we tried to get and to stay sober. And in 3-4 pages, it's doing the exact same thing for those who love us. Here are the methods that people have tried to get us to quit drinking, to leave us, to try to control, to try to change the situation. And just like on that paragraph on page 31, there's a progression, and we saw the progression from 104 all the way to the top of 107. We saw the hopelessness of this illness, and we saw that just as it is hopeless for us, and we continue to go downhill and spiral towards worse and worse and worse consequences, so too do those who love us. And so another way to recontextualize this is not that I'm not a wife, this doesn't apply to me, or I don't have a wife, this doesn't apply to me, but to look at do I have a history of codependent, unhealthy, unhealed relationships where I am desperate for a loved one to change? And if I tried all the things that we spoke about last week to get them to be different, to show up different, to leave, and I end up back with them, and did that not work? And if we're absolutely not, if anyone put me through any of the stuff that's written there, they are out the door so fast, and absolutely not good for you. Love the self-esteem you got. Can't relate. But the other way to look at this is through the lens that this is the power of the illness of alcoholism. I don't want to be a bad person. I desperately don't want to harm people. And yet I'm somebody that is crossing those lines. I'm somebody that's hurting people in ways I never wanted to do that. And so I'm doing these things almost against my will. And that is the power of alcoholism. And so that's how we're recontextualizing this. And when we look at it in that way, it's not this outdated chapter. We're seeing how this is applicable to the here and now. Because, codependency hasn't gotten more progressive. Maybe it has for you guys, but not for me. And so as we're on page 107, welcome everyone, and we're on the first full paragraph under these conditions. And so as we go through, especially this part of Two Wives, we're going to do some bouncing around. Get bouncing. We, I promise, are going to be bouncing. And part of why we're going to be bouncing around so much is because I want to challenge that idea that this is like brand new information, or I want to challenge this idea that this information is outdated or doesn't apply. Instead, what we're going to see is that there are threads that have been carried on throughout the very start of the book until this chapter, and continue on past this chapter, and that this information is still relevant. So under these conditions, we, and the we that is being referred to, is the loved ones of alcoholics, the friends, the family members, the spouses of people who love us. It says we naturally made mistakes. Some of them rose out of ignorance of alcoholism. And how could we blame people who do not have alcoholism for misunderstanding the illness of alcoholism? We misunderstand the illness of alcoholism. You know, how many of us show up to the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous and are like, it's not an illness, I'm just not trying hard enough. I just don't want it bad enough. You don't understand, I'm just a bad person. How often has somebody gone out, and maybe we've even been the one to say it, why didn't you call before you picked up a drink? Why didn't you get to a meeting? Because we don't have the power to do that when this illness is on us. You know what I'm saying? So there are times we don't understand this illness and we have it. So how could I begrudge somebody who does not have this illness, that is watching the destruction that I am like bringing about in my life and the lives of those around me? How could I not get that they don't get it? And it says some of them rose out of ignorance of alcoholism. And that's just to not know what this illness is. And just for those that are maybe new, the illness that we're talking about, we have an allergy of the body. So once I start to drink, I cannot stop. So that ignorance of alcoholism is, why don't you just have 3 drinks? You know, and I'm thinking back to, there's a solution where it's like, he's such a sweet girl, you should think he'd stop for her sake. And I'm like, I am such a sweet girl. He should stop for I couldn't stop for his sake. But these things where it's like, the misunderstanding that of the allergy, that I can't just have beer and wine, that I can't just drink while I'm on vacation. I can't control it. Once I start, I cannot stop. But also the misunderstanding of the obsession of the mind. And the obsession of the mind talks about this idea that no matter how much I need to, no matter how much I want to, I cannot stay sober on my own power. I have to stay sober. I want to stay sober. I need to stay sober, but I continue to go back to it, despite the fact that it is ruining my life. And we think, man, you just got to get a good job, focus on your family. You got to stay busy, do things to stay busy. You got to, you got to get out of the relationship. You got to get into a relationship. You got to this, you got to that. But none of that can keep me sober. Nothing less than a spiritual awakening that I grow and that I deepen is sufficient for an alcoholic. And I didn't know that when I got here, you know? I just thought, okay, I'll go to a lot of meetings. That was always easy for me. I did not know what it meant to have this illness. So it says, sometimes we had sensed dimly that we were dealing with sick men, so that we were dealing with an illness. That's what we're talking about. And welcome, we're on page 107, first full paragraph. Man, we didn't go far. All right. Had we fully, and so to sense dimly is to not get the full picture, but to get a taste that something's wrong. Had we fully understood the nature of the alcoholic illness, we might have behaved differently. How could such men who loved their wives and children be so unthinking, so callous, so cruel? There could be no love in such persons, we thought. And just as we were being convinced of their heartlessness, they would surprise us with fresh resolves and new attentions. For a while they would be their old sweet selves, only to dash the structure of affection to pieces once more. And so what I want us to do is I want to make a note to see page 21. And what we're going to do is we're going to make that note, see page 21. And we're going to see that this is not just from the loved one's perspective, But you see on page 21, we're going to have a look at the real alcoholic. And it's the paragraph on page 21 that says, "Here is the fellow that is puzzling you." Now I'm going to skip down a number of lines where it says, he is often perfectly sensible and well-balanced concerning everything except liquor. But in that respect, he is incredibly selfish and dishonest. He often possesses special abilities, skills, and aptitudes, and has a promising career ahead of him. He uses his gifts to build up a bright outlook for his family and himself, then pulls the structure down on his head by a senseless series of sprees. And so what we're talking about on page 107 and what we're talking about on page 21 is this. It's the cycle of alcoholism. And because it's me, I did not bring it up ahead of time. So I'm going to bring it up right now. And I will just share the screen so we can talk about it. Oh, I didn't do it where I put me in the corner. Hold on. I'll put me in the corner. I don't know if that's helpful or not, but I'm in the corner. Nobody puts baby in a corner. I'll go in the corner. All right. So what we're talking about here is in both cases where the alcoholic, we seem so callous, so cruel because of the things that we do on our sprees, that inability to control the amount that we take once we start to drink. And then that fresh resolve, so I'm back on 107, that fresh resolve that I'm never going to do this again. And then I'm giving my attention to my loved ones and I'm showing up and I'm rebuilding those structures. Just as it was talking about page 21. See, I say I'm never going to do it again. And in that period of sobriety, I will do some stuff and I will rebuild some stuff. But what happens is inevitable. And what happens is the obsession of the mind. And the obsession of the mind is that thought that I have when I am sober that tells me this time will be different. It tells me nobody will ever know. It tells me I've just got to get it out of my system. It tells me I'll just take one drink. It tells me if I'm going to kill myself anyway, so why don't I get drunk? It tells me nobody will ever know, or I get a case of the suddenlies and I got a drink in my hand and I don't know how it happened. That is the obsession of the mind. And see, what happens is I am on this cycle where I say I'm never going to do it again, and I mean it, only to do it again. And so in that spree, I smash the structure that I've built to pieces once more. And I burn it to the ground. And does this sound familiar to us? Where I say I'm never going to drink again. I have a period of sobriety, only to drink again. And because I can't control it, I burn it to the ground. And I come to and I say I'm never going to drink again. And I try to have a period of sobriety, and the obsession of the mind kicks in. I drink again and I smash it to pieces again, and I emerge filled with that remorse and regret, and I say, I'm never going to do it again. But a day, a week, a month later, I get a thought, and that thought tells me this time will be different. And off I go. And that is the hopelessness of alcoholism, that I will drink again. That there's nothing that I can do in and of myself to put between me and the first drink. And do we see that I'm not just along on this merry-go-round of misery by myself? I'm taking those who love me with me. And those who love me will go on their own cycle. And their cycle will say, I'm never going to put up with Paige again. I'm done. I'm setting boundaries. I'm not going to enable her. I'm going to move to South Florida. I'm done. And then this time will be different. I'll give them another chance. They went to treatment, and they're back on their merry-go-round again. And so I point that out because that's, if I have examples as an alcoholic, if I have examples of my own life of this cycle, what that means is I have this illness, and I'm up against an illness which no human power can relieve. Nothing but a spiritual experience is going to work for somebody like me. But if the Al-Anon, or the potential Al-Anon, or the codependent, or the person who is as bound to alcoholics as the alcoholic is bound to alcohol, has these examples of where they said, I'm never going to do it again. And it might be a different drunk. It might be a different alcoholic that they're putting in and out of this cycle. But if they have examples from their life of this cycle, what this means is I need a spiritual experience. nothing less than a spiritual awakening, that I grow and that I deepen, is sufficient. And so again, we're pointing to, this is not a chapter just for a little housewife, in the 1930s that's baking cake and making martinis. No, it is for somebody who wants to not be on this merry-go-round anymore, but doesn't know how to get off. That's who this chapter is for. And of course, the lens of this chapter is how to be most helpful to the alcoholic. It might be best for the Al-Anon to dump the guy, but it spoke about last week that they tried. And then they'd find themselves back again and again. So it goes on to say, so for a while they would be their old sweet selves, only to dash the structure of affection to pieces once more. And it says, asked why they continued to drink again, they would reply with some silly excuse or none. And there's two notes that we can make. The first note that we can make is that what we're talking about there is the obsession of the mind. I don't even know why I drank again. That's the power of this thing. Now, the second note that we can make is to pop on over to page 23. I'm sorry, because I can see some of you are like, I'm just trying to make the first note. Don't give me a second note to write. So the first note, obsession of the mind. Second note, let's pop over to page 23. And so obsession of the mind, and then page 23. And so where we're going to go on page 23 is the second full paragraph. It's just below the halfway point of the page. When it says, once in a while, he may tell the truth. And the truth, strange to say, is that he usually has no idea why he took that first drink than you have. Some drinkers have excuses with which they are satisfied part of the time, but in their hearts, they really don't know why they do it. Once this malady, and that malady just means illness, sickness, has a real hold, they are a baffled lot. There is the obsession that somehow, someday they will beat the game, but they often suspect they are down for the count. And what we're talking about is that obsession of the mind. Man, we don't know, like, it's easy to be like, yeah, I drank because work was stressful, or I drank because that person was mean to me, or I drank because, man, if you were feeling the way that I was feeling, you would drink too, but only to come out the other side, spun out after a relapse. And I feel worse than I ever did before. And I cross boundaries I never wanted to cross. And I hate myself. And I hate who I've become. And I do not get in my heart why I would do it again. I don't want to do it again. But I do it again. And so that's what we're talking about. The power of the obsession of the mind. So let's pop back over to 107. This isn't our last bounce for this paragraph. I'm so sorry, y'all. I'm just really pointing out we got some ideas, we got some threads, and I want to tie them through. It's like spiritual cross stitch. And if somebody is doing cross stitch, it's like, no, it's not. And what you look like is the back of a cross stitch page. Yeah, that is a cross stitch joke. And if you're wondering, do I cross stitch? Nope. Why do I know that? I don't know either. I'm as baffled as to why I took the first drink. Anywho. All right. So it goes on to say, it was so baffling, so heartbreaking. Could we have been so mistaken in the men we married? When they were drinking, they were strangers. Sometimes they were so inaccessible, it seemed as though a great wall had been built around them. And again, I just want to point out, what happens when there's two. One, I'm going to give us a page. Actually, I'll tell you the page, and then I'll tell you the tangent, and then we'll go to the page. That's what I'll do. Page 18 for that bottom sentence where it says, they were so inaccessible, it seemed as though a great wall had been built around them. That's where we're going to go there. But I'm going to go on this tangent so everyone has time. How thoughtful of me. How considerate with my tangents. But that idea of what happens in Alcoholics Anonymous, what happens in the 12 steps. Because oftentimes we talk about, like, I'm afraid of doing this. Like, we're afraid of living in God's will because I'm afraid, who am I going to be? Like, who will I be without my defects of character? And we don't understand what God's will is. Very simply, at minimum, God's will is to work these 12 steps as a way of life like my life depends on it. Just in case you're like, I don't know what God's will is. It's the 12 steps. It's inventory. It's sharing that in a 5th step. It's a quiet hour. It's 6 and 7. It's going out and making amends. It's continuing that 4 through 9 process in 10, that 4 through 9 process in 11. It's deepening my connection with prayer and meditation, and it's helping others. That is God's will. And then everything else, I really do mean it'll sort itself out. But I'm afraid of who will I be? Who will I be without my defects of character? Or who will I be without my alcoholism? Or who will I be without that thing that I'm turning to that's killing my soul? Because, we come here and some of us, we put down the drink, but we start to pick up other things. So who will I be without that? And who will I be is who I was always meant to be. When it talks about these men are strangers, it's like, it's who I become when I'm living in my active alcoholism. When I'm living in my defects of character, that is not me. Who I am is what is left when all of that is stripped away. And that's who I always wanted to be, but never thought I could be. That's what gets to happen here. I get to be that person that's no longer a stranger. So page 18. Now, I'm sorry if you were like, no, I didn't find it yet. I was with you on the tangent. I'm the problem. So we're going to go page 18, 3rd paragraph. And it's right above the paragraph with italics. That's the paragraph that we're looking for. It's on page 18. And it says, highly competent psychiatrists who have dealt with us have found it sometimes impossible to persuade an alcoholic to discuss his situation without reserve. So the medical and psychiatric and psychological therapeutic professionals, we give them money and then we lie to them. That's what it's saying. I will pay you to listen to my lies about what's really going on in my life. That's what it's saying. And it says, strangely enough, wives, parents, and intimate friends usually find us even more unapproachable than do the psychiatrist and the doctor. There is something about us where the people that we are closest to, we've got the most walls up with. Those are the people that I can't listen to. The people that I love the most and the ones that love me the most. And sometimes I'm putting up those walls with good motives. I'm putting up those walls because I love you and I can tell that I'm destroying my life and that hurts you. And I don't want to hurt you, so I'm not going to let you in. But that hurts them because they know. They can tell I'm dying. They can tell. They might not know the point A to point B of what's going on, but they can tell something's going on. And just as destructive it is to lay bare to what's happening, is that just as destructive to try to have those walls. Man, I hurt the people that love me the most. And we can see how alcoholism puts me in these no-win situations. I don't want to let them in because it'll hurt them, and it will. But I don't want to keep them out because it'll hurt them, and it does. That's the power of this illness and what it erodes in our lives and the lives of those who touch ours. So back on page 107. And the reason I'm talking about this is, again, this is the power of alcoholism. This is alcoholism's destructive force. And when we have a look at Two Wives through some of these lenses that we are looking at, it has a radically different connotation. And it's carrying the exact same information that we've seen throughout the entire book. And it goes bottom of page 107. And even if they did not love their families, how could they be so blind about themselves? What had become of their judgment, their common sense, their willpower? And in this paragraph, what we're looking at is all the things that do not work to keep me sober. The love of family, the love of friends, self-love, self-preservation, judgment, common sense, willpower. None of that is sufficient for an alcoholic to stay sober. Why could they not see that drink meant ruin to them? Why was it when these dangers were pointed out, they agreed and then got drunk immediately? Now, what's the answer to that? We're going to talk about it in the next paragraph. But if you want the answer right now, you're like, girl, I am on bated breath. Edge of my seat. You're like, I'm not on the edge, girl. I'm right in the middle. But if you are like, what's the answer? That is the obsession of the mind. The thought that I have when I am sober that takes me back to the first drink. Again, that is the power of this illness. And again, we might think, man, step one, or not step one, two wives, it's outdated, it's not important, but what we've spoken about is vitally important. Step one information. Of course, there's places earlier in the book that smashed this home, but it's that same idea being reiterated. Welcome, we're on the very first paragraph of page 108. It says, these are some of the questions which race through the mind of every woman who has an alcoholic husband, or everyone who is watching a loved one being ravaged by this illness. We hope this book has answered some of them, because that's the purpose, to give us information about what alcoholism is, what the solution is, and a clear-cut plan of action to get from the hopelessness of alcoholism, the hopelessness of step one, to the hope and the awakening of spirit that is in step 12. That's the purpose of this book. And it says, perhaps your husband has been living in that strange and distorted world of alcoholism. Or that strange world of alcoholism where everything is distorted and exaggerated. How true is that? How true is that? You know what I mean? And it's true, especially when I'm drinking. But I can be sober, and my illness is untreated, and the world is tremendously distorted. I'm wrapped up in the bondage of self and the lens through which I am looking. Man, it's like one of those, well, I was thinking those drunk goggles. Now, I know we all know drunk goggles, but I'm talking about like the ones that you can buy at like a joke shop or like, I cannot, or put on glasses with the wrong prescription. Like I cannot see the world for how it really is. And that's a beautiful description of what it is like to live with my illness untreated. And if you're like, what do you mean by that? Like, start working with others, sponsoring others. You'll sit down with a sponsee who is absolutely convinced, this is Paige, this is what I've got to do. I've got to go to the gym. That's what'll fix me. A relationship, that's what'll fix me. I got to go to work. That's what'll fix me. I've got to do, these ideas. And it's like, hey, could we just do the steps? And it's like, no, I got to focus on that. But it's like we can't see it, and we believe it when we're in it. And I believe me, I have lived in that strange and distorted world of alcoholism. It goes on to say, you can see he really does love you with his better self. And I think that's what makes this illness so awful for those that love us, is they can see that thing inside of us of who we really are. But they'll only get these glimpses of it. And the more that I'm in this illness, the further and further away, the more guilt, the more shame, the more resentments, the more fear, the more self-pity, and it clouds that. It says, of course, there is such a thing as incompatibility, but in nearly every instance, the alcoholic only seems to be unloving and inconsiderate. It is usually because he is warped and sickened that he does these appalling things. Again, what we are up against is an illness that is making me do things that I would not do otherwise. That's the power of this thing. And it's not a cop-out. Because if we're here today, and as we get into parts, there's a couple parts in Two Wives where I am going to emphasize, this is not a part of the book where we take and we throw it to our spouse and be like, this is for you. Be nice to me. I'm an alcoholic. No, if I am the one reading this book, what I am reading applies to me. It applies to me. And so I have the responsibility to treat my illness with the desperation of a drowning person. I have a responsibility to treat my illness like my life depends on it, because it does. I have a responsibility to treat my illness with the intensity knowing that if it is untreated, drunk or sober, I'm hurting those I love. It's not a cop-out. I have a responsibility. So welcome, we're on page 108. We're in the middle of the first paragraph, because I don't go quickly. But I do talk too fast. It's wild that we don't get through this thing quickly, but I'll talk a mile a minute. Vivian has told me many times, slower. I'm from the South. Slower. And I practice. I try. I got out of touch with it. Anywho. So it says, today, most of our men are better husbands and fathers than ever before. See, well, and the takeaway from that is I'm not a husband nor a father. No, thank you. Although we do know I will pull out those dad jokes. So, that's my paternal role, as it were. But the takeaway is that what is available in Alcoholics Anonymous is not, well, just don't drink. No. We get to be the best versions of ourselves, not between the prayers at a meeting, but the best versions of our prayers, or the best version of ourselves outside of the prayers of the meeting. Out in the world, we get to be the best version of myself and of ourselves, and that doesn't happen just by not drinking. That happens through the rigorous application of the 12 steps. That's what we're talking about, because that was like an automatic thing when this book went out to the world. Like, that's the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, these 12 steps. And that spiritual awakening is what brings about the change. And I point that out to say, like, that's what's available. And that also, if we're here today and we're struggling with emotional sobriety is the point. It's the point. I don't need to take a seminar or an extra class. You go on a retreat if you want, but I don't have to. The point of the 12 steps is to bring about emotional sobriety. It's not like for the keeners, although, I do have my colored highlighters, and I do have a favorite brand of pen. That'll happen. You write inventory enough, you will have a favorite pen before you know it. Alrighty. So this next paragraph, we're going to have a look at, and we're going to tie it in. We're going to tie it in, and you can make a note already. We're going to see it on page 66 and 67. So feel free to, I'm going to read it. I'm going to explain it. I'm going to point out these pages again, but I just want to give us lots of time for that bouncing around. So it says, try not to condemn your alcoholic husband, no matter what he says or does. Ooh, this is not a line that we get to, don't condemn me regardless of my behavior. That's not the point. We're going to see what we're talking about here. He is just another sick, unreasonable person. Treat him, when you can, as though he has pneumonia when he angers you. Remember, he is very ill. And so that is a direction. So try not to take your anger out on the alcoholic. Bless you. That's what it's saying. And so let's pop over to page 66. And so we might be like, well, hold on a minute. We just want again, what's the preconceived notion? We just want the wife to put up with the poor behavior of her husband. No, we want the human being who is suffering to get out of suffering. Let's go to page 66, first paragraph. It's first full paragraph. Right here it says, it is plain that a life, that is any life, not an alcoholic life, so any life, especially the life of those who live with us and are around us, any life which includes deep resentment leads only to futility and unhappiness. So holding on to that anger, holding on to that condemnation is only going to perpetuate that unhappiness, and it is futile. It doesn't work on the alcoholic, and it does not help the family member and the friend and the spouse. It says, to the precise extent that we permit these, that we allow ourselves to hold on to them, do we squander, which is to say waste, the hours that might have been worthwhile. Like Jimmy right now, he's got this beautiful sunset in the sun. I can't not notice these things. Like, it is beautiful, a beautiful day in South Florida. Now, I'll tell you, like the retired businessman who lolls in the Florida sunshine complaining of the sad state of the nation, you see, I could be in a place like that and miserable and miss the beauty and the reality of this present moment. The finite days that each and every one of us are given, squandered because I am busy ruminating about, but you, but they, but you don't understand. That's what we're saying. Resentments are toxic and destructive for any human being, alcoholic or not. And it says, but with us, the alcoholic, whose hope is the maintenance and growth of a spiritual experience, this business of resentment is infinitely grave. What that means is it is infinitely fatal. There is no limit to how fatal a resentment can be. And if you're like, girl, I don't know if that's what that means. Well, the next line says, we found that it is fatal. For when harboring such feelings, we shut ourselves off from the sunlight of the Spirit. You see, I cannot live in that connection with a power greater than myself and hold on to resentments and hold on to my selfishness and hold on to my self-centeredness. It says the insanity of alcohol returns. That's the obsession of the mind. You see, what happens is I treat that spiritual malady and I treat it with that spiritual awakening. And when I do, the obsession of the mind lifts. And when the obsession of the mind is gone, I don't need to drink, so I don't set off the allergy. But if I harbor enough resentments, enough fears, enough self, that cuts me off from that light, it cuts me off from that sunlight of the Spirit. And I'm in that darkness. And what is inevitable will happen. What is inevitable for an alcoholic is to drink again. It's nothing less than a miracle to stay sober. And we have a pretty good track record at producing miracles. That's what the spiritual awakening is. And it says the insanity of alcohol returns and we drink again. And with us, to drink is to die. Now, I'm also going to pop us over to the top of 67, first paragraph, where it says, though we did not like their symptoms and the way these disturbed us, they, like ourselves, were sick too. And that's what we see, is that when I am struggling with anyone, they are sick. They might not have alcoholism. And we sick today in maybe 2025 has a bit of a like negative, ew, you're sick, like a judgmental connotation. But not so in the 1930s. In the 1930s, sick was like with compassion. They're ill, they're suffering, they are in pain. And so it goes on to then give us the sick, what's known as the 67 prayer, the resentment prayer, or the sick man prayer. And I'll just read how I say it. God, help me to show this person the same tolerance, pity, patience that I would cheerfully grant a sick friend. This is a sick person. How can I be helpful to them? God, save me from being angry. Thy will, not mine, be done. And then in the chronological order, in the fourth column, we'll get into finding where I was at fault. So if we go back to page 108, the direction, try not to condemn your alcoholic husband no matter what he says or does. He's just another sick and unreasonable person. Treat him as though he had pneumonia. When he angers you, remember that he is ill. The resentment doesn't help. It doesn't help the alcoholic, and it's eroding the life of the Al-Anon. And the alcoholic, just like the Al-Anon, is suffering from an illness. And so it is not saying don't be resentful, just don't have a resentment. But it is pointing to the same treatment that I have to take when I have a resentment, which is to take it through the columns, to get to that fourth column place where I say the prayer and I see where I have been at fault, because that's where the freedom lies. So again, it's not like just coddle them up. It is like, okay, I've got to have a look at myself. And here's the thing. It goes on to say, there is an important exception to the foregoing. So there's an exception where it's like, and this is it. We realize that some men are thoroughly bad intentioned and no amount of patience will make any difference. So those people that aren't wanting to get well, those people that aren't interested, the people that are just being manipulative. And this is the direction. An alcoholic of this temperament or we're going to see the direction here in a sec. And so no amount of patience will make any difference. An alcoholic of this temperament may be quick to use this chapter as a club over your head. So again, what we're not talking about, which is, I'm an alcoholic, coddle me. No, it says, don't let him get away with it. Don't put up with that BS. Absolutely not. No. So it's not saying just put up with it. No. We have to have an understanding of what alcoholism is. Alcoholism means he will relapse. And if I'm not able to leave, I need to be aware that will be a continued progression. That will continue to happen. But if there is somebody and they're not wanting to get well, they're not willing to get well, they're not open, they're bad intentioned, get rid of them. And it goes on to say that a whole lot more clearly than it did just then. So it says, don't let him get away with it. If you are positive he is one of this type, you may feel you had better leave. Leave. It's giving us that direction. Is it right to let him ruin your life and the lives of your children, especially when he has before him a way to stop his drinking and abuse if he really wants to pay the price? And again, that's this idea. If I'm here today and I'm struggling to get sober, I'm struggling to stay sober, or I'm just struggling wrapped up in the bondage of self, we have a way before us to stop our drinking, to stop our abuse, to live happy and free. And the way before us, the way is the 12 steps as a way of life. And that will bring about a spiritual awakening, a spiritual experience. But if I'm not willing to do it, it's saying, leave them. And here's my experience. I can't, what meeting was it? I can't remember what meeting it was at. But I had somebody, maybe it was just a sponsee that was asking me, now I remember, but I had somebody asking me about a sponsee of theirs that was continuing to stay stuck in toxic alcoholic relationships. I know. I am shocked. An alcoholic in a toxic relationship? That's not applicable to any of us at any time. And I shared my experience. I was working with someone. And she could not make it a week. And I think I shared about her last week. She could not make it a week without relapsing. And at the same time, she was in a very, 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 very unhealthy, you couldn't even call it a relationship, but a very unhealthy situation where they would get together and they would relapse together. And it was awful and it was toxic. And the person she had been working with before me was always like, you gotta leave them, you gotta leave them, you gotta leave them. And I remember she 18 months and she couldn't get a week sober, 18 months in and out. And I'll be honest, I was like, ooh, let me at her. Ooh, I want to work with her. That was my vibe. And then she asked me for help. And she knew she needed to leave him. I knew she needed to leave him. Everyone knew she needed to leave him. He probably knew she needed to leave him. And so I didn't need to tell her that. But instead, what did we do? We dove hard into this work and to this way of life. Really, these 12 steps. And not only did she get sober, but it was that work that allowed the awakening to begin in her. And that's what allowed her to leave. And so that's kind of what we're going to be pointing to here. If I'm not able to leave, maybe what I need to do is lean into God. And how I do that is through a rigorous application of the 12 steps. And then I will be given the ability. And actually, that's not even a theory. That's my experience. I had my own dumpster fire that I called a loving relationship. I've had more than one, but this one comes to mind. This one. And I could not leave him. and I would swear off, okay, I'm done forever. And we were both in our alcoholism, both in our addiction. And I would swear off for the both of us, we're getting sober. And then he would relapse. And then that would be really stressful, having to deal with him and his drinking. I need a drink to deal with that. And so you guys see. And so I would be on this cycle, and we would be on this cycle. And I would swear off him, and he would come back. And I would swear off him, and he would come back. And I could not get free. And so what happened is I began, and I've had other relationships that were unhealthy. I'll talk. Actually, man, I'm off on this tangent. So I'm going on this tangent. All right. So so that situation, it really wasn't until I began to work in the steps, to take the actions, that I began to be able to leave him, and leave him for good, and close the door on that. I had another situation where I was in, it wasn't a healthy situation. It wasn't romantic though. And at the time I was involved in Steel on Steel. Steel on Steel was created by a well-known speaker. His name was Mark Houston. And the whole thrust of Steel on Steel was about deepening a relationship with a power greater than ourselves. It's this idea of like holding ourselves spiritually accountable. So we would meet once a month. We would meet once a month, and we would share honestly about the struggles in living a spiritual way of life and working these 12 steps. And then we would give each other considerations to take to prayer and meditation. And I remember the first time I ever did Steel on Steel, it was all about, you need to get rid of that guy. Girl, you need to not have this person in your life. It is unhealthy. And I'm like, I know. But I couldn't just let go. I knew I needed to, but I was so scared. And so what Steel on Steel taught me in an experiential level, of course there were weeks and there were months where the consideration would be like, fire his butt, fire him, get rid of the guy. No, but I couldn't quite do it. But most of the suggestions were about ways in which I could write inventory, ways in which I could bring in prayer, meditation, spiritual suggestions. And so what I've learned is, if I'm not able to do it, that's okay. Maybe I just need more God, that spiritual lever. Was it Archimedes that was like, give me a lever and you can move the world, right? Because I needed that spiritual lever, because I was wrapped up in fear and I was wrapped up in what I think I needed. And that gave me enough connection that I was able to do it. That was a real good decision. Do not regret. But so all of that to say, there are times where, when we look at this, and when we're seeing in unhealthy relationships, what I need is on the other side of the actions that I don't want to take, which is to say the 12 steps. I need the 12 steps to get me to that place. And so it says, and bear with me, one more bounce around. Sorry. When it says, especially when he has a way before him to stop his drinking and abuse, if he really wants to pay the price. And so that's the thing. I have to be willing to pay the price. What is the price that I have to pay? Well, if you're writing in your book, you can make a little note to see page 14. Page 14. So let's hop on over. So we're at the tail end of Bill's story. We're right as he's about to have his white light spiritual experience. So we're page 14. We're going to be the first paragraph. And what happened on page 13 was Bill Wilson took the course of action that later became the 12 steps. And so page 14, it talks about actually, you know what? I'll back us up a little. And actually, I saw a thing in the comment that's in regards to me ending that situation. It was I wasn't willing. That's true. I was so wrapped in fear, I wasn't willing. So I needed to build willingness. And if I approach resistance and fear and being stuck with compassion and curiosity and willing to move in terms of spiritual action, that will carry momentum. Sometimes I see things and it doesn't register in my brain until a little bit later. I sometimes have trouble processing. So if you're like, why did you mention that now? It's because I read it a little while ago. I was like, what was that? and then what was in the chat, like, clicked just then. Also, do know that sometimes legitimately I miss things, right? I saw that. Sometimes I miss things. So page 14 is what we want to see. But let's have a look at the very bottom of page 13, just to like really tie it in. So it said, my friend promised. This is Abby Thatcher promising Bill Wilson when these things were done. So when I do these actions, the 12 steps are like you can almost think like, okay, did I do this? Did I do this? Did I do this? It's actions. It's actions. Did I take these actions? So after I take the actions and continue to take the actions, I would enter upon a new relationship with my capital C Creator, a spiritual awakening, a spiritual experience. That's what's promised. Abby promised it to Bill, and that is promised to us. If I'm willing to do this and give this my best go, I will have this experience. It says that I would have the elements of a way of living. This is a way of life. It's not a 30, 60, 90 day, 6 months. It is a way of life. The elements of a way of living which answered all my problems. All my problems. And that's why there's not a single thing that I cannot bring to the 12 steps that the 12 steps will not help. That's not to say if you need outside help, don't get it. But I go to the 12 steps. I take these problems through the 12 steps. All my problems. And it says belief in the power of God. Not belief in God, but belief in the power of God. Plus enough willingness, honesty, and humility. Now those are the essential requirements. Willingness, honesty, and humility to establish, so to create and to maintain the new order of things. So again, I've got to create that spiritual awakening, which that's not quite how that works, but I have to take the course of action to put myself in a place to receive the spiritual awakening. So to bring it about, and then I've got to maintain it, to deepen it, to grow it, to seek more experiences. So I need that willingness, that honesty and humility to create that spiritual awakening, and then to deepen it and to grow it. That's what it's saying. Those were the essential requirements. So that's what we're talking about when it says simple but not easy. The course of action is simple. Writing inventory, simple. Sharing that with someone, simple. A quiet hour reflecting on the work that I've done so far, simple. Asking God to take away that which I've seen, simple. Making amends, simple. Continuing that process, simple. Prayer and meditation, simple. Working with others, simple. Not easy. Not easy. I don't want to. I'm scared. That's what we're saying, right? And this is the tie-in. This is the tie-in to what we were talking about at the bottom of page 108. It said a price had to be paid. So it says if he is willing to pay the price, this is the price that we need to pay. This is the price that I need to pay. And it says it meant destruction of self-centeredness. Doesn't sound like this is a selfish program, does it? Destruction of self-centeredness. That needs to be absolutely obliterated and destroyed. And some of y'all know I describe sobriety and Alcoholics Anonymous as a gift. Deeper than that, I describe emotional sobriety as a gift. What I mean by that is I did not earn it, I did not deserve it, any more or any less than anyone that is here in this room, or any more or any less than anyone that is dying of this illness. But also it says a price had to be paid. Paige, a gift, you don't pay for a gift. But what I do not realize when I'm staring at what feels like a mountain of self-centeredness is the price that I am paying is part of the gift that I am receiving. You see, that destruction of self-centeredness, when I am free from that, that is when I am free free from that bondage of self, free from being stuck in me. And when I mean me, I'm like me on me. It's like bone on bone. It is rough, right? And if you're like, okay, that's what I need. How do I destroy self-centeredness? That is the purpose of the 12 steps. Destruction of self-centeredness. That is the purpose. It goes on to say, I must turn in all things to the capital F, capital L, Father of light, who presides over us all. In all things, I need to turn to this power, this creator, this spirit of the universe. And it's the 12 steps that allows somebody like me to do that. And I went on a little long on that last tangent, but believe it or not, that's a perfect stopping place. So next week, what we're going to do is we're going to get into the 4 types of drinkers. And I'm going to let you know, if you're used to the 5 types in doctor's opinion, the 4 types are more helpful. They're more useful. And they're tucked away in a chapter that I don't want to read. It doesn't apply to me. And so we're going to have that experience. We're going to have a look at the 4 types of drinkers. And then we're going to get the directions on what do we do with each one of them. And then there's more to this. There's a whole lot more to this chapter. But I hope you'll join me next week. And what I'll do is I'll stop the recording.